In Belarus, huge crowds of protesters have been demonstrating against President Alexander Lukashenko and the election.
Since then, close to 7,000 protesters have been detained.
Several state TV employees left their jobs in public protest.
Hello, I'm Meenakshi Ravi, sitting in for Richard Gisbert, and you're watching The Listening Post, working from home. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. In Belarus, the media you're consuming says a lot about which side of the political divide you're on. Are you watching state TV, or are you a telegrammer? Another book of bombshell revelations about Donald Trump puts the ethics of the president and the book's author under the spotlight. In death, as in life, Iranian General Qassem Soleimani remains a powerful PR symbol for Tehran. And back to Belarus. And the music that's become the soundtrack of the protests. It's been just over a month since Alexander Lukashenko, the man who's been president of Belarus for 26 years, claimed victory in the country's presidential election. It's been just over a month since the biggest demonstrations in Belarus's history swept from the capital Minsk all across the country and have persisted in spite of disproportionate state violence. The engine driving Belarus's protests can be found online on the messaging app called Telegram. The most popular account, NAKA, has 2 million subscribers in a country of 9.4 million people. But Telegram hasn't been the only media arena in which Belarusian politics is playing out. Once loyal state television employees have been resigning and joining the protests. Filling in for them are journalists from Russia, invited by Lukashenko himself. This is a story of a generation of Belarusians making clear they want more from their government and their media and facing off against a president who has Moscow to fall back on. Our starting point this week is Minsk. Belarusians would not have been surprised when, in his first interview after one of the most tumultuous months of his 26-year presidency, Alexander Lukashenko declared that he wasn't going anywhere. The interview was broadcast on state TV, not just Belarusian state TV. It was aired in full on the Kremlin-backed RT.
The interview is incredibly significant in the sense that it's 4 of the most senior journalists in Russia flying out to Minsk to interview the president. You had Margarita Simonyan from RT, and then you had a radio journalist and 2 other TV journalists. That clearly is designed to send out a message of support and also to remind Lukashenko how reliant he is now on Russia.
Russia and Belarus's relationship is often described as sort of this marriage of convenience. And it clearly makes sense that Putin, at this point, is ready to give Lukashenko his support and to not see a pro-Western regime come into play in Belarus. I mean, while Lukashenko, he has made statements in the past highlighting Belarus's sovereignty and trying to show that Belarus is, can stand on its own 2 feet, Russia is very clearly his fallback. And that's what we're seeing happen now with Russian reporters being sent.
And the Russian support has been crucial for Lukashenko. For a political strongman like him, these are very uncertain times. When he declared himself the victor of the presidential elections held on August 9th, making it his 6th straight victory, mass protests erupted across Belarus. In response, Lukashenko sent out security forces to literally beat the protesters down. There were cameras everywhere filming the violence, and so Lukashenko turned off the Belarusian internet.
There was a lot of police brutality, there were shootings, there were water cannons, tear gas and so on. So the authorities wanted to limit information from spreading. And they did it. They switched off the internet. But after 3 days, when the internet was back and the majority of the population learned what happened during these 3 days, the protests resumed and there were even more people. Women started protesting, workers went on strike, which was very, very scary for the authorities. So that's the power of information.
Sort of just to understand the media environment in Belarus, almost all independent media is basically exclusively lives online. Well, you can't talk about the media and the protest without immediately talking about Telegram and the role of Telegram in the protests. And if you look at the numbers of subscribers to different channels, the numbers, they're in the millions. And so you can really see that Telegram has basically become the information, the news broadcaster in Belarus.
The popularity of Telegram in Belarus started last summer when a young man, Stepan Svatlov, started this popular Telegram channel, NAKA, which became the main source for information that the media usually cannot share. They would immediately be fined and closed. NAKA was popular even before the election. However, the big jump in subscribers happened during the election and immediately after, because when the internet was cut off, Telegram's technology allowed people to still access it. And so everyone began subscribing to NAKA. In a matter of days, this Telegram channel grew from 300,000 subscribers to having 2 million subscribers.
The popularity of NAKA and other Telegram channels like Tutbay Official, MK Belarus and Belamova are overwhelming Lukashenko's most powerful messaging tool, the state broadcaster. The Belarusian state TV network had been losing credibility and audience numbers well before the contested election result. And then the protests began, and the imagery and editorial line from Belarusian state TV was even more detached from reality than usual.
Против органов правопорядка снова были использованы коктейли Молотова, автомобильные тараны.
The idea that police were brutalized by protesters was so patently false that many journalists working in state TV walked out of the newsroom and straight onto the streets to join the protests.
The key moment for state media employees were the images of shooting in the center of Minsk, when they started bringing people with gunshot wounds into hospitals, when people had their extremities and fingers torn off. This was their Rubicon. These horrible images that were online everywhere, but the Belarusian TV kept quiet about it. The protest in the newsroom began when staff requested to show the truth about the violence by the armed forces on August 10th and 11th.
There were hundreds of people who went on strike. There was even a situation when nothing was shown on TV, like there was just this empty screen. And that kind of scared the authorities immensely, because if the whole population, even in parts of the country which are farther away, villages, would see that something went out of control, that process might be irreversible. So the authorities really very quickly had to come up with an idea of how to get this situation in control. There were threats at first. The authorities threatened journalists working at state television, and then they invited Russian media workers to work instead of those people who walked off the job.
Why is it so significant that Lukashenko openly expressed gratitude to RT for the journalistic support that it provided? It's very important because it shows that he doesn't care anymore about the kind of arguments that he was running before, about the importance of Belarusian national sovereignty and about a multi-pronged foreign policy approach. He's basically appealing directly to Moscow. He's saying, look, we may be the target, the immediate target of these protests, but you're going next, and we are grateful for all the support that you've provided. Where that goes from here, we don't know, but definitely he is extending, you could call it a hand of friendship, I suppose, to Moscow, and we have to see precisely what kind of a hand is extended back in return.
For Moscow, this is a crucial moment in the game of geopolitical chess that's being played in the region. For years, Lukashenko has used his country's strategic position between Europe and Russia to play each side off against the other. But now that he is on the back foot, with his political survival in question, Putin has leverage to mold Belarus as Russia's bulwark against the West. And as Moscow and Minsk strategize, the protesters in Belarus are approaching the point at which they need to articulate their mission, a plan of action, and how they're going to put it into operation. With prominent members of the opposition in exile and the continued crackdown on demonstrators, this situation is going to demand much more, both of the activists and the media forums they gather in.
we've kind of seen these social media revolutions happen before. We've seen the role of Facebook in the Arab Spring. We've seen the role of Twitter in Iran during protests there. And all of those, as time went by, became much more complicated. Social media sites, which were supposed to just really enable democracy, it turns out that it's much more complicated than that. And in Belarus, we're seeing this kind of message that the revolution will be telegrammed. But beyond what's happening online, it's a real meaningful change to happen in Belarus. It's going to take more than posts and messages. It's going to take very clear leadership and clear organization. So I'm really interested to see if Telegram, beyond being this really powerful tool, what will keep the pro-democracy movement moving in the country.
We're discussing other media stories on our radar this week with one of our producers, Flo Phillips. Flo, another month, another book about the Trump presidency. Why is this latest one causing so much controversy?
That President Trump may have lied is not the only news story here. It's not like we haven't heard that before. We're also talking about the integrity of one of America's most prominent political journalists, Bob Woodward. Woodward has a new book coming out, Rage, based on 18 interviews that he's conducted with the president over the past few months. The revelation that's hit the headlines is that the president actually acknowledged the deadliness of COVID-19 back in early February, but continued to downplay the virus. And all of this has been recorded in Woodward's interview tapes.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
But beyond the obvious failings of the president, there's also the issue here of journalistic practice and the reporter's duty to share important information immediately, especially if, as in this case, it has the bearing on millions of lives.
So how does Woodward justify his decision? How does he defend the fact that he sat on this information for so long?
Woodward says that there was no agreement preventing him from publicizing the information at the time, but as he told the Washington Post, he made the decision because he could not establish where Trump was getting his information on the deadliness of the virus from. It's not a very plausible argument. Look, this is by no means the first time a reporter has saved a shocking scoop for publication, but it's hard not to make a comparison with the young Woodward, whose Watergate expose helped bring down President Richard Nixon in the 70s. The Woodward who might have cared more about sharing advanced information than a book advance.
You've also been looking at a story about two Australians, both of them journalists in China, Flo, and they were pulled out of Beijing recently by their employers after they were questioned by Chinese police. Can you give us the detail on that?
So these things are never clear-cut, Mina, but it does look as though this is yet another round of diplomatic cat and mouse. The two journalists in question are Bill Birtles, a correspondent for Australia's public broadcaster, the ABC, and Michael Smith from the Australia Financial Review. 10 days ago, Chinese police appeared at both of their houses after midnight and told them that they were, quote, persons of interest in another case regarding the detention of another Australian journalist, Cheng Lei, who's been held by Beijing authorities since August 14th. Now, the officers also told Birtles and Smith that they were barred from leaving China, at which point they obviously fled to the Australian embassy from where they were sent home this past Monday. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that the journalists were being questioned as part of, quote, normal enforcement of law. But the plot has thickened since the Chinese state news agency Xinhua reported that back in June, Australian agencies actually conducted a number of raids on Chinese journalists' homes in Australia. So this whole episode could well be a direct retaliation, especially given Birtles and Smith were the only Australian journalists still working in China.
Okay, thank you, Flo. In Western policy and media circles, he was known as the Shadow Commander, a general in Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard and the head of a clandestine militia network that left a trail of death right across the Middle East. In his country, Qassem Soleimani was anything but shadowy. He had become something of a celebrity, a frequent presence in the media, and in the official narrative, a national hero. That is, until he was killed by US forces back in January, when he was cast into a new role, that of the martyr. Martyrdom is a powerful concept, one that's been at the heart of state rhetoric in Iran, and in the wake of Soleimani's assassination, Iranians have been inundated with imagery glorifying him in death. The Listening Post's Tariq Nafenau on Qassem Soleimani and the media manufacture of martyrdom in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
سردار سرفراز اسلام حاج قاسم سلیمانی پس از عمری مجاهدت بامداد امروز در حمله بالگردهای آمریکا در فرودگاه بغداد به شهادت رسید.
Before he was killed by a US drone strike in January, Qassem Soleimani was among the most feared and respected figures in the Middle East. For more than 2 decades, he led the Quds Force, an elite unit of the Revolutionary Guard responsible for operations on foreign soil, securing Iran's interests across the region. Soleimani had acquired a kind of mythical status before he was killed.
قهرمانی جامع الاطراف که هم متخصص جنگ بود و هم استراتژیست و سیاستمدار.
In death, his legend has grown, and his likeness has been harnessed by a government intent on restoring its fading credibility.
سید الشهدای جبهه مقاومت بگذار حاج قاسم صدایت کن.
There was an initial shock soon after the assassination of Qassem Soleimani because he was considered to be invincible. But he was not invincible. He was located by a drone and he was attacked and he was killed. So they are putting the best face to this scenario that they can. Everything in the arsenal of the propaganda machinery of Islamic Republic has been mobilized in order to turn him into a saintly figure, into a martyr, into an icon of everlasting revolution.
آرامش رزمندگان جبهه مقاومت گرمی دل فرزندان شهدا.
Soleimani the martyr, larger than life, immortalized in the still image. Pictures like these dominated Iran's physical and cyberspace after his death, bestowing Soleimani with a status typically reserved for mythical heroes and saints. From the Battle of Karbala and the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in the year 680, a foundational event in the Shia faith, to the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, in which an estimated 1 million Iranians lost their lives, the veneration of Soleimani speaks a visual language around martyrdom that runs deep in Iran.
Martyrdom has become a key and essential part of state-sponsored rhetoric because explanations have to be made for an overabundance of deaths. So an explanation had to give greater meaning to the bloodshed, that a death is not the end, it is just the beginning. And so we have seen since his death in the last 6 months many images that equate him with Imam Hussein, and therefore as an ultimate martyr whose reward is paradise.
Imam Hussein is very important for Shia Muslims in general. He's the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. He's particularly important in the post-revolutionary sphere in the Islamic Republic because the way in which Imam Hussein was martyred is a story as told by Shia Muslims of oppressors rising up against those who oppress them. It is an image that resonates almost immediately for anyone who is viewing this. And the reason it can communicate so much is because of historical mythology as well as almost 4 decades of image making in this sense.
So the propaganda machinery of the Islamic Republic uses the reconfiguration of the picture of Qassem Soleimani into that iconography in order to revalidate and re-energize the Shi'i component of the Islamic revolution. Martyr, Shaheed in Persian and Arabic, has a connotation of being a witness. Witness to what? Witness to truth. Witness to the veracity of the Iranian revolution.
The Iranian government knows that the revolution needs to be nourished, reimagined with each generation, and it has a convenient and flexible platform for that messaging in the billboards, banners and murals found in cities across Iran. The political propaganda of Iran's billboards is sometimes more subtle than that found on TV. Billboards are by design more fluid, more responsive. they can be unfurled overnight and changed just as quickly to meet the needs of the day.
The image of the military salute with General Soleimani in the front and a variety of Iranian citizens standing in salute behind him includes women with very loose hijab and one very small boy. He's engaging in a form of sign language that forms a T. In Iran, the T stands for the vertical bodies of soldiers that head into war, only to be returned horizontally. What has struck me about this billboard on Valias Square is that you don't see a single Ayatollah or cleric. There's no overt religious iconography. And that stands out for me in comparison to the other images, which in fact embrace a more religious rather than nationalistic stance.
Before his death, Soleimani had already become a compelling character in a story the government wants to tell about itself. Movies and music videos have been produced about the self-effacing general who fought the nation's enemies abroad to, as Tehran claims, keep Iranians safe. Soleimani himself cultivated that image, posing for Instagram selfies with his network of proxy militias that for many are a symbol of Iran's malign influence in the Middle East.
His strategy on Instagram was to selectively put images of himself, especially in Syria, to show that he is at the helm of various militias and divisions, that he has been a successful tactician and leader. So if you were a Syrian looking at those images on Instagram, in essence, those images are highly agitational. It's a way of asserting power.
So once he was killed in the way that he was, his own media teams went into high gear, producing from murals to social media campaigns. Oftentimes, it's very difficult actually to tell that it's coming from pro-regime producers in Iran, because they know that if their young audiences in Iran, or maybe even in Iraq and Lebanon, know where these are coming from, they're going to be like, oh, that's propaganda, and not pay attention to it. Instead, they're doing it in a way where they're removing as many of their fingerprints as possible, but producing things that are entertaining first and foremost.
In life and in death, Soleimani helped build an image of a powerful Iran, but the government is in many ways its own worst PR problem. Just 5 days after Soleimani's assassination, when officials sought to coalesce Iranians against outside enemies, the accidental shooting down of a Ukrainian airliner, the deaths of all 176 passengers and crew, and the denials that followed enraged many. In the weeks before the strike that took out Soleimani, the government used lethal force to crush nationwide protests, killing hundreds of people. And one need only look at the subversion of Soleimani's image to see that not everyone is buying what Tehran is selling.
The state is aware of its own fundamental illegitimacy in a modern world, that you have a group of octogenarian theologians ruling over a massively young generation, and they don't even have a memory of the Iranian Revolution of 1977-79, and even if they did, they couldn't care less. So they want to generate and sustain a younger generation for posterity that will keep the Islamic Republic alive. To what degree this is successful, you can see it in the anxiety of the way that they are projecting Qassem Soleimani. The larger the pictures, the larger the posters, the longer the graffitis and the frescoes, the more sign of the fact that they realize that the time of this iconography has really passed. It doesn't sell.
And finally, we turn back to Belarus, where, like in most major protest movements, anthems of change are the beat on the street. The local music scene has been simmering underground for years, and now Belarusian musicians like the Minsk-based group NAKA are responding to the national mood. Take Broken Hearted Boy, a song with lyrics drawn from the work of Vladimir Nekleyev, one of Belarus's most famous dissident poets. It's a bit of a tirade against those standing by the president. It's been played at many of the demonstrations, and on YouTube alone, it's had hundreds of thousands of views. We'll leave you with this excerpt of the song, and we'll see you next time here at the Listening Post.
Помню себя в подростковом пальто. Мы шалопутными были мальцами, но под лесами не был никто. Где вы учились быть под лесами?
Мы не на то направляли умы, были наивны не мы разгильдяями, но негодяями не были мы. Где вы учились быть негодяями?
Да, мы боялись тюрьмы, Колымы. Жить мы хотели нормальными жизнями, но жабами не были мы. Как удалось вам стать жабами? Да, чтоб не сдохнуть в грязи и пыли, мы продавали поэмы, повести. Только мы совесть продать не могли. Вам не понять это людям без совести.